sometimes we figure those things out kind of as we're trying to implement those.
And
So,
Cassie,
yeah.
Can I add?
Yeah.
That, and hi, Ian Lighthizer, City Attorney's Office. I think it's actually, yeah, this group is interested and focused on CCAP, but I think what this discussion revealed is that it's actually a broader issue for us. There are a lot of services that community organizations in Bend do, and a lot of those might be in alignment with city goals, city council goals, work that the city does. What we really don't have, CCAP and otherwise, I think what we really don't have is the right kind of internal grant program or policy to potentially award funds when available to other organizations that can do this work that's in alignment with city goals. So yeah, we're talking about CCAP related work right now, but I think what it revealed for us is we probably need a broader policy generally to make this happen in the right way. So that's something we're going to work on.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So it wasn't like just because it was a CCAP thing, but it was CCAP being kind of different than some of the recent other sponsorships we've done, kind of highlighted this more like system-wide issue that we're having. So we're going to be working on what an alternative looks like. That's probably something that we'll focus on later in the summer or the fall. So we can kind of revisit that body of work. But what we're really hoping to do is develop a program that allows us to have those kinds of partnerships moving forward as something that we offer, as opposed to this kind of coming up as like a one-time, just this kind of one-time opportunity that came up. So I think in the long run, it could be it should be a really beneficial development for the CCAP, because it will allow us to kind of move forward with a lot of our programs where we want to rely on community partners. It will give us a framework to do that. We did let the Environmental Center know that they could piece off the Solarize portion and resubmit that into the sponsorship request. So $10,000 of their request was specifically for the Solarize program. So they did do that, and that already was approved. So we are moving forward with sponsoring the Solarize program. That was the most time-sensitive program for them anyway. It's kind of already underway, and they've got plans for the summer and fall for that. So we're sponsoring that, and we're also going to be partnering with the Solarize program in a couple of other ways. We've talked about distributing a mailer to kind of advertise that program, and we're actually meeting next week with the staff in our communications department to talk about other ways we can support that even more. So that is the conclusion of all that. Are there any other questions about all that?
I have a question. So my understanding was the budget that request would have come from was already sort of dedicated, earmarked for CCAP implementation.
Yep.
And with the CCAP being what it is, which is a community climate action plan, not just like a city internal oriented thing, I guess I'm still like, there's still a few questions lingering in my mind of how this was opposed to existing policy or unclear or something like that. Because you referenced we need a CCAP specific program. And as I think through it, like there's a budget dedicated towards CCAP implementation. We have this committee, you as staff, like largely tasked with implementing the CCAP. To me, that sounds a lot like we already have a CCAP implementation program. So, maybe this has to wait until that, whatever type of policy discussion to create whatever's next will be to like answer this question, but I'm still like left a little confused with what's lacking to grant that kind of funding request.
And the main issue, it's not that it was the CCAP implementation part. The problem was around how we selected who we are granting that money to. So it's more around procurement of who can receive those funds. So the problem was that we didn't have one of the problems is kind of multi-layered in terms of their internal processes, but one of the kind of fundamental issues is that if we have that large amount of money to implement CCAP projects, we need to make it available equally to any other organization in the community who might also be able to provide some of those services. And we didn't really do that because it came up as an individual sponsorship request. So that's that part of it. It's not just that we can't implement it. And then
right, it was like the procurement end of things.
Sure.
Tell me if I'm wrong, Cassie, but this was money that was in we'll say your budget, not your personal budget, but the budget you manage for consulting
Yeah.
services, right? So
Yes,
all of that funding, if it's gonna go out the door from the city to someone else, really needs to go through our procurement process, which is more than just somebody coming in and saying, I can do the work, and the city saying, great, here's a check. So their process is to make sure that happens in a fair and I'll say legal way. And this request, as it, at least as I understood it, the way it manifested, and this is, I mean, again, to be clear, these are people doing work or proposing to do work that is in alignment with the CCAP and the cities and the council's goals, but it sort of came up more of as almost a grant request.
Yeah.
So the money was there, it's intended for really a similar or even the same purpose, but if it were awarded through the consulting function, which is what it was intended for, it's got to go through the procurement process. The request didn't come in that way. So I think that's what I say that's what I mean when I say what we don't really have is a program to respond to, like a grant request that maybe is not the same as going through the procurement process that we have to go through under our city code and state law, but it needs to include some elements of fairness. And I won't say competition, but opportunity to make sure that things happen in the right way and public money isn't going out the door in the wrong way. So obviously none of those unsavory intents were here, but once people started looking at this, we realized we didn't have a good way to do this in what I'll call I think a transparent and responsible way. So my guess is that this or something like it will eventually happen. We just need to put the structure in place to make sure it happens in the right way.
exactly. So like, I think that the easiest way for us to implement, to like find a community partner to implement a CCAP strategy would be for the city to write up, and if we have the funds to do it, to write up an RFP and say, you know, different organizations can submit a proposal if, you know, to do this work for us. So that's kind of the easiest way to do it. And that's something that we can do. And if the committee were to have a recommendation like, hey, we really want to do a solarized program, let's find, you know, that's our recommendation. We could write up a scope of work and be like, we would like someone to run a solarized program for us. There's a little bit of a nuance when we have community organizations who are able to do this work, and it kind of comes from the community as opposed to the city defining that first, you know? So that's where there's kind of like a couple of different mechanisms converging in on each other. And we have to just like figure out, when do we have to go the RFP route? Is there some sort of grant route that we can go instead? Those are the pieces we have to figure out. And I hope that I can give you guys better direction for like how we make some of these things happen once we have some of those questions answered internally.
That all makes sense, and I certainly understand like the need to avoid whether actual or perceived like appearance of unfairness or, you know, something like that. So yeah, that makes sense. This is a good learning opportunity for us, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I guess I'll just finish with a comment of like, you know, we've been working on implementing the CCAP for 4 years. At times it's been a struggle to like figure out how to do it. Because again, I'll go back to what I earlier said, like this is a community climate action plan. So it's the city trying to catalyze like community-wide actions, which requires the participation of non-city entities, partners. And, you know, when that funding request came in last meeting, I was really excited because here we had a ready, willing, able, like, you know, existing organization with a program in place, like that was going to do some of this work that we've been working for 4 years to like find ways to do on like 3 really vital, important elements of the CCAP. So I guess it's a little disappointing that we're learning this now, because that like in many ways feels like a missed opportunity.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I definitely hear and understand that it's frustrating. On kind of multiple levels. And I think just the one response I'll have to that is that it's something that I've been doing a lot of thinking about, just like how we both implement the CCAP, and then particularly that part around how do we partner with community organizations for that? Because they're, you know, there's kind of challenges at multiple levels there. And it's something that I've been talking with leadership about a little bit, and we are committed to kind of, especially at this point in time where we have, you know, we're doing a CCAP update, we're going to be bringing on more capacity, which changes a lot internally. We're committed to kind of thinking through some of ththese frustrations and challenges and trying to come up with like, how can we do this better, particularly when we have the updated CCAP? How can we implement these things more effectively, make it less frustrating for you all, you know, and for us, and actually just see some of the projects that we've had a hard time moving forward, like how can we effectively do that? So
And
no like easy answers on that, but it's definitely something that we're talking about internally with leadership.
And I'll say this because Cassie's too polite to say it, but she's probably frustrated too because she sort of ran into maybe not a brick wall of lawyers, but a bunch of lawyers asking questions. So we are, you know, we like to be part of solutions, but I think here we were probably part of the problem too. So but she didn't say that, but I said so. Yeah, so we're working on it. Like I said, I hope we can in not too much time figure out how to do this in the right way, because I think there's no daylight among anyone on what you said, Rory. Like this takes community work and community partners. We just need to kind of grow up a little bit about how to do that in the right way efficiently. So sorry for the inefficiency on this one.
I'm curious, yeah, you said hopefully not too much time, but what kind of a sense do you have of a timeline for, I mean, obviously if it's a systemic thing, that's gonna take some time to figure out. But I'm curious about that timeline and then also what the implications are in terms of spending the budget you have when you need to spend it, or if you're able to roll it over across fiscal years. Just recognizing that, yeah, if there's other ways we want to put those funds to use, or if it makes sense to wait. I don't know if you have a sense of that yet.
Yeah, I think realistically, it's like a fall project, just knowing what people have planned for the summer and key staff being out and that sort of thing during the summer. As for the funds, it's a little bit tricky because we're finding that some of our existing projects, so the CCAP and the electrification proposal are already, it's seeming like they could use some more funds for those. Plus with a new staff person coming on, there might be some new expenses. So it's starting to eat in, like, I guess we have that bucket of funds that we'll have to kind of make some decisions as they come up about whether we start using those funds for these, you know, if we hold it, or if we want to use those for some of the needs that we have in the immediate term. And I don't know like what the total dollars will shake out from that. But the electrification project is kind of the one that I think is going to need probably the most additional funding for. That has been identified as a longstanding council priority. So in my mind, I've been seeing that as a little bit more of a priority project. I just don't know how much more. We have this budget is until next July 1st. So we have until then where it's like, you know, we just won't have access to it at all anymore. But by the end of the summer, I think I'll have a better idea of what other expenses that 100,000 can be used for, that we might need it, and then just have to make some decisions about what's a priority.
Yeah, it's I can imagine how frustrating it is. It's frustrating for us. We spent committee time on city advisement from staff and leadership to do the process that we did, to then be told, no, those thresholds aren't actually right. That's like, it's a little, yeah, it's frustrating. So I share the frustration with everybody at the table. And just want to make sure that we're taking whatever that next step is. And it's like, if we have to pivot and we have to do something different and it's harder and less efficient, but it still is getting work done. Like, I don't want us to wait on, or we will have, like, it will be less, whatever it is, because of timing and process and our availability and jumping into all of the next things that we have on our agenda, or not on our agenda, but on our like workload. So there's a cost to the city. It's not just, there's a cost to all of this, regardless of how we ended up where we're at. So I just want to make sure that we still keep those options open and those ambitions and just pivot and find the right way to get the work done. And if we need to do volunteering kind of myself, but also an open invitation, if we need to figure like the thing that we think can get done, that we need to write up through a procurement process and go
Yeah.
through that. And if that's the way that we have to do it right now, whether it's similar to what the RFP or what the proposal that came forward or not, if that's what we need to do, then we can help with that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get stuck in a situation where dollars aren't committed in time, because it's not committed in time or thought of in time, it's spent in time. So we can use the resources that have been entrusted to us to get this work done.
Yeah, I know. Thank you for bringing that up. We definitely have the standard procurement process, which we've been describing is something you guys can use now. So if there's something you would like to do to implement the CCAP and leverage, the dollars that we do have flagged for implementing the CCAP, we can do that.
And I know it's also not technically it's not our budget.
Yeah, exactly.
Either.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
But
I do have that held for CCAP implementation broadly. So yes, we can still move forward with something in the absence of this other program we're talking about. We'll just need to use the channels that we have available to us today, which is essentially our standard procurement process.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Are we ready to move on from that topic?
yeah,
I just,
go ahead.
with at risk of going deep into procurement weeds, like, do you all do like RFIs ever? I'm just thinking like,
We can.
if the idea is to surface ideas from the community, like, are there tools within the existing process to bring some of those ideas forward in a way that lets you see the universe before having to dictate in an RFP exactly what services you're looking for?
We can do things like that. I think we can even also write an RFP to be sufficiently broad enough that it kind of is selecting that. We could say, here's the CCAP, like we're seeking proposals for, programs that implement key parts of it, and maybe just with a little bit direction highlighting kind of the key areas. I think we can do something like that. So that's something. And yeah, and I guess if you guys are highly interested in trying to move something forward like that sooner than later, we can discuss that. Maybe that's something, Neil, you and I can follow up on.
Yeah.
Yeah, just knowing.
Is that what I'm hearing? That you'd like?
Changing process takes time.
Yeah.
And procurement takes time, especially if you're gonna be using a new process for the first time. So if there's a way we can look for the services we know we want sooner,
Yeah.
I think it's worth investigating. That said, obviously, you've got 2 new contracts to manage and
Yeah.
the CCAP planning process, and so there's the administrative side of that. And if it's a contract as opposed to a grant, that probably means more overhead for you. So there's trade-offs,
Yeah.
but I do think it's worth continuing the conversation.
Yes, definitely. And yeah, I think to the point of this conversation is that we may need to set up a new process. Part of the discussion we were going to have is like, how can we use the existing processes that we have to meet some of these goals? So, and we can have that conversation sooner than the fall. I guess I was like jumping ahead a couple steps and anticipating potentially a new process that I would think would need to take to the fall, but we can, I'll continue working on that ASAP. And we might be able to do something sooner. And I'll kind of talk with Neil and Lauren as the chair and vice chair, and we can figure that out and get back to you. Oh, good.
Anybody online just trying to be a good hybrid host?
I can just jump in and say, yeah, I sort of support looking at existing avenues as well, and we can talk more about that. Knowing that, yeah, another, like the city process may take longer to, when we're redefining these programs.
Maybe I'll just chime in that I understand both sides of this issue, and I recognize though the long-term need to maintain trust and credibility with the public in general, and that's probably gonna lead to some added transaction costs in the meantime, but I can see how that's worth it.
I will also just add to Mark's comment. I think the one thing I was just thinking about, and just for kind of restatement, for this piece of it, when I came up during the committee meeting, Neil and myself had recused ourselves, since we work at the Environmental Center, and just to avoid any appearance.
Chose to.
Chose to. Just to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. And so I think the only piece I was going to add is, as this process goes through or any options are looked at, yeah, continue to err on the side of maintaining that, I guess, as well as possible, which I know is difficult. But yeah, that's the only flag I was going to mention.
Okay,
Okay, no, I think we're good.
okay. I'm just making a list. Okay. Well, the other exciting update is that we've been moving right along with hiring a new staff person. So the application closed and we already did our lightning round interviews. We had some really awesome candidates, so I'm super excited and feel really optimistic about being able to add some really great skills to the team. So we're in the process of trying to schedule panel interviews. We have those tentatively scheduled for next week, but running into a couple of scheduling issues with some of the candidates. So I've got to figure out what that is, but we should have someone selected within the next couple of weeks. And we'll definitely make an intro once we have that finalized.
Very
That's
exciting.
exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Okay, that's all for staff updates. Any other questions before we move into the agenda?
I guess I have a question. What do you see the role of the new staff being in relative to your position now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how I have defined it is one of their primary focuses is going to be doing a lot of our data analysis and data tracking. So I'm hoping to bring our greenhouse gas accounting in-house, and kind of with that skill set, having someone who can do our greenhouse gas accounting in-house, but who's also going to be able to kind of track our other progress metrics more closely and more actively, and then use those to generate insights for us so that we can use that data more effectively in our decision making. Because I know that we kind of right now, we kind of do the inventories, we have the data sitting out there, but it's been a little hard to like have good insights in the right time to inform our work. So that's kind of the vision, is that they have that skill set to be able to bring that as relevant into our work, and then also do our inventories like slightly more frequently, not every year, but more frequently than every 5 years. And might be able to use the same tools to look at like more topic specific analyses as well as those come up. So that's going to be one big bulk of their work. Another big focus is going to be leading the outreach and education efforts, because we do have so much of that. So if they come on, depending on when they come on, they'll probably take over a lot of the website project. And even if we finish the website project before they come on, they'll be the person who can actually actively maintain that, and then be doing a lot more of that kind of proactive outreach and education. So a lot of the ideas that you guys have shared through that creative brief, there'll be someone with capacity to actually carry that stuff forward. So I think that could be really exciting, because it means we'll have capacity to do some of the more involved outreach and education work. And then the last bucket of work will just be kind of project management and program development. So that will be taking on some of the stuff that I'm doing now, but just having more capacity to do that. So if we're interested in moving forward many projects at once, we have someone else who can also move some of those projects forward and be doing the background research and analysis and providing that information for you. And they'll have more capacity to do that than I do, since I'm also doing a lot of the just the bigger picture city stuff that I participate in as well. So that's the vision for that, and they will be the backup for the committee. I anticipate even perhaps having them do some of the working groups, and so we can divide up that work a little bit, so you all will work very closely with them. And that way, if I take a vacation during a committee week, someone can hold the committee meeting.
You're allowed to do that?
Not now. We can. Or if I get sick on a committee day, which hasn't happened yet. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, this was a good discussion. I'm glad we talked about that sponsorship follow-up, and that is the beneficial thing of all that is that it did kind of bring to light across many stakeholders at the city, like some of these challenges that we're having. So we'll be able to hopefully come up with a good pathway forward. Okay. Ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. So this next agenda item, what we need to do for this next phase in our CCAP update is take the existing actions in the CCAP, because we're going to keep most of those actions. We're just adding some, but I wanted to refine the language for those CCAP actions. And so I provided a memo with a bunch of proposed alternative language. I don't know if you all had a chance to really review that carefully, but what I want to do today is just kind of share just some of the general like themes that as I was making all the changes, they kind of fell into similar buckets, the types of changes I was making. Just discuss those with you. I have a couple of the specific ones that I'm going to bring up on the slide and want to discuss with you all just as examples to kind of walk through. I didn't want to walk through every single one because it didn't seem like a very productive use of time to kind of try to wordsmith the actions here. But if any of you, if as you were reading them, you do have ones that you would like to talk about, we have time for you to raise those. And then after today, if anyone wants to actually, if you have like suggested like wordsmithing edits, you are free to send those to me, and then I'll try to compile them based on everyone's feedback. So that's what we're trying to do with this agenda item. So like I said, we had a couple of themes of the proposed changes. One of the biggest ones that kind of is the most substantive change is that I would like to propose that we rewrite all the actions to have the city as the lead partner, and then update the language to reflect what the city's actionable step is. And the intent is not to lose the partnership approach. The intent is to clarify, like, what should the city be doing in order to make this action go? Because otherwise I felt like we were in a position where there were actions where it's kind of like, okay, someone else is the lead partner on this. So like, we don't necessarily have to do anything, or we would kind of be like, should we do something? And I know that the intent from this group and even from when we wrote the CCAP is that if those actions are part of the CCAP, the city should be actively supporting those in some way. So I wanted to rewrite them to reflect that. And I hope it'll make it easier for us to like identify what does this action mean and what should we be doing. So we'll walk through a couple of those, and then another common change was just we had a couple of actions that had multiple parts that were quite different, and then splitting those actions into multiple actions so that it's easier to like track progress on those things. So we don't have actions that are kind of halfway done where we can avoid those. And then the third bucket was just rewording actions to have just simpler terms and phrasing, just to make them easier to understand. And a lot of those were just really simple, like we're just changing the words because the original words were kind of awkward. In some cases, it's rewording the action to be like a little bit broader. So we can talk through some of those too. And there are ones where I felt making it broader improved the flexibility in a positive way, but there's always a trade-off when you're making action, trying to figure out the right level of specificity for an action. So we can talk through a couple of those, but does anyone have any questions or feedback or thoughts on just the types of changes in general in those three themes?
And I'm watching the list online, so if you're online and want to comment and just raise your hand, I can kind of fit you into the queue and conversation here in person.
I just had a clarifying question, Cassie. So this discussion right now is just based on the proposed changes to the CCAP actions. And then I see it later in the agenda, we have the discussion on a new action generation. Is there going to be an opportunity today or future about general CCAP changes?
There is, we can talk about, like you're saying, changes to the CCAP that are not just adding new actions or refining existing actions, like bigger picture themes. Yeah, that's definitely a discussion we should have.
I was just wondering if this is the right time or if we're gonna have opportunities later.
Now that you mention it, I'm not sure that I don't have that specifically built in.
Okay.
Would you like to share what you're thinking right now? I don't want to open up the whole discussion, but I just want to know
Yeah.
what type of thing you're talking
I've
about.
brought it up before. The original CCAP strongly suggested going from sector-based emissions to consumption-based emissions in its approach, and to see if a future CCAP update could do that. And I know there are some limitations with data that probably still exist, but I am curious if we can use this opportunity for a CCAP update to start making that switch. So it's not a specific action, but it is a change of what it would focus on for each of the actions, I guess.
Okay.
Can you clarify what's the difference?
Yeah, it especially relates to waste and materials actions. So if you're looking at sector-based emissions, because most of the materials we consume are not made in our city, for sector-based emissions, waste and materials as a whole is only like 2%. This is only looking at the downstream landfill impacts of emissions. But when you look at consumption-based emissions, then you are you're considering all the upstream emissions as well for the materials we consume, and then it increases to about half of all emissions. So it's a pretty significant shift, and that's why I think the first version of CCAP strongly suggested that. They just mentioned the limitations being they don't have good data to fully support the data side of it.
So for that specific one, I think the best place to address that will just be in the new action creation for the waste and materials group.
Yeah.
The current CCAP does address consumption-based emissions. All of like the waste prevention strategies are basically what we have to get to that.
Yeah.
So I think if you want to bolster kind of focus on that, the place to do that would be in the new actions. But I think that still raising the point about like wanting to have a discussion about any just like kind of bigger picture CCAP changes to make. And so I think the right time to do that would be maybe I think maybe after we come up with the new actions, and we can kind of look at, you know, what the new CCAP is going to look like, and then figure out in the current CCAP, we had all the new actions, and then there was an additional section that was like implementation recommendations, and it had some different types of like recommendations that were more program wide, not like a specific action. So we will plan on making sure that we build that into a committee meeting to have a discussion like that. Does that sound appropriate to people to do that after the new action workshops?
I think it makes sense. I think the only thing maybe this is part of the new action thing, but we've discussed this as well, but I wonder if there was still a discussion or opportunity to discuss whether there was any reorganizing of the categories for the actions as well. I think there had been some actions that didn't necessarily fit in one of the buckets, but could still be important. I don't know if we've had that discussion. I know some that were brought up were too broad and outside maybe the scope of this update process, but I'm curious if that has been considered fully, and if this would be a good time, or that would be part of the other conversation, because that would then the actions would directly relate to that category piece of it.
What I would propose is at our next agenda item, when we're talking about the new action, part of that is like, what are the steps in the CCAP?
Yeah.
So if we could table that thought.
Sure.
For the next agenda item.
Yeah.
That would be great.
That sounds
I do
good.
have an answer to it, but I'm resisting the urge to respond.
That sounds
Yeah,
good.
we can focus on this agenda item. Okay. So let's just jump into a couple of the examples.
Nancy,
Yeah,
can I, before we get
Yeah.
into the nitty gritty, one other comment? So your first category of proposed refinements here about changing some of the language to be city-led stuff.
yeah,
I'm of two minds about that, because I hear what you're saying about, like, if we can clarify what the city's role is in making this action happen, it can help all involved and like help the city actually implement the thing. But then kind of relating back to our discussion about community partners and procurement, like, so the flip side is, like, I don't want to lose, again, the comment I made earlier, like, this is a community climate action plan. It like, to actually be implemented and have the intended greenhouse gas reduction effects, it needs to be like in all hands, like the city can't do it alone. So hopefully there's a way we can thread that needle, but at least one of the proposed changes in here, which I can point out when we get to it, like, I see perhaps a downside of rephrasing it in the way that it is.
Okay.
If we kind of lose like the need for action from an external entity to accomplish that.
Yeah.
Action,
Okay.
CCAP action. So
Okay.
I don't know, like, I'm curious to hear others' thoughts. Hopefully we can, like I said, thread that needle, but like, I think there's a risk to making it more boxed into just what the city's doing, because then you might lose some of that broader, like, the whole city working together to accomplish the goals.
Mhm. Does anyone else have thoughts or feedback on that? That was definitely like, that is the biggest kind of, it's a little bit of like it's not really, it's like somewhat of a philosophical change. So I am curious other people's thoughts on that switch.
Yeah, I was concerned that it would sound like the city has to take the first step, and then, other people can take the remaining action steps, and just want to make sure that the city has some steps, they might not be the first step, and the partnership effort.
I'm also thinking, like, a lot of these actions are outreach and education, like we've been talking about. And I think that part of the work of the CCAP is what makes some of the like external things happen, right? Like, if there's workforce education and things like that, and incentives, like providing the education about incentives that are out there for homeowners to go do things on their own. Like, so it's gray, I suppose, right?
Mhm.
But I just want to be sensitive to not like making it like it's only a city responsibility to do things, because what we're
Yeah.
trying to do is motivate change community wide.
But I think there's a difference between clarifying the role that the city can play in certain actions, but not losing the essence of the actions themselves. And one example I was looking at was that there's one around EB2A is like originally it says increase community education on energy efficiency and available efficiency incentives by developing and delivering educational programs. And in the proposed one, the whole developing and delivering educational programs is dropped. And I get that's because the city may not be the one to develop and deliver those programs, but I feel like there still needs to be a reference to the city somehow supporting the development of those programs. And so, like, not losing the key trackable action just because it's not something the city will do directly.
I mean,
Yeah.
almost like there should be a little narrative
Yeah.
like attached to some
Or yeah,
any of
or
the
just,
actions. Yeah.
because I do feel like if we take out some of the specifics because the city's not doing them, how are you gonna track or, provide support for those things happening?
Right.
Or a pathway for them to happen through some new grant program that could be exciting, so,
You're looking at EB2A.
yeah. On the bottom of page 4. And so, like, it does increase
So-
flexibility, but then, and it's just one example.
Yeah.
but,
And I'm like looking at my own explanation and I'm a little bit confused by that. When I broadening that one of the reasons I actually wanted to broaden that one is that our original intent around when we first put the CCAP together for the outreach and education, the the discussion was like, we should almost entirely rely on community organizations to do that. Because the city doesn't have a ton of, capacity for that, and other organizations are better for that. What I've heard from you all in the last couple of years is actually the opposite of that, wanting the city to take a little bit more of an active role in that. So I think with respect to the outreach and education ones, I was trying to make them more flexible so that the city, it was clear that, there is a role for the city to also take ownership of that. Now that I'm reading it, like, I don't know if dropping the developing and delivering educational programs, like maybe that part's not even relevant to that, but that was in adjusting those, that was kind of my thought. And I think for me, the reason to switch it, because I had the same, these are the things I was thinking about, like, what do you lose when you kind of switch that mindset? I think the problem is it has to do with more like the practicality of like a plan that is the city's adopted plan, and it's not somebody else's adopted plan. It's not community organization's adopted plan. It's not the transit agency's adopted plan. So it's like, I think we kind of had that vision in the beginning, like, oh, this will be something that there's community ownership of, but the reality is it's the city's adopted plan. And so I don't feel, to me, having it written in there without the city as a lead partner, like, I didn't see it practically like doing that out in the community, because it's not a plan that other agencies or other community partners necessarily use as a decision. So it's kind of just, to me, it was like the practicality of how city plans are used, and then wanting to use that structure to be the most effective within the city. So that's kind of my thinking along it. And maybe there's a way to make the wording, make other parts in the wording clear that we intend to partner with other organizations, or what that looks like.
Have you checked with any of those identified partner groups, like to see their, like this isn't part of their planning, but how that's received?
I mean, I
Specifically?
didn't like, have
Yeah.
not specifically asked
Yeah.
them that, but I work with each of them
Right.
enough, or at least some of the key partners enough
Mhm.
to kind of understand what the relationship is like.
Another example that I think might illustrate how that this type of rewording could limit the action is ES5A, which is also on page 4. So this is the current action is install solar panels on public buildings to demonstrate public sector leadership, and changing it to just city facilities. And I'm thinking of well, a few things. So one, like, it's just a great community goal that we, it should be the city's policy aim that other public agencies do this type of thing, install solar on their buildings. But then maybe more like specifically thinking of situations where the city does partner with another public agency. The first one that comes to mind is like the mobility hub program. And I know those have limited structures, but say they did, like that would be a great incentive for the city and CET to like implement this policy together. And then this is probably much harder to do, but the city through its land use authority permits other public agencies land use projects, right? So, the library district's building a huge new library on the east side of town. I'm not saying that it's part of that this is a land use criteria where the city could require the Deschutes Public Library District to install solar panels, but it's kind of nice to have it somewhere in the city's existing policy, in that conversation about, hey, library district, like, have you considered solar panels? We have the city policy, that hopes that new public buildings will install solar panels in our community climate action plan. So again, like, it's not like a requirement. Totally understand the city's limited jurisdiction, but it's kind of just like a nice culture change piece that we can point to help some of these other partner, whether it's public agencies or private, like, hop on board with CCAP implementation.
Yeah, I guess in that case, to me, it would still make more sense to have the strategy be install solar, install solar panels on city facilities and encourage other other public agencies to do the same. Because I think the reality of this strategy now is that it says all public agencies are going to install solar panels. Some do, some don't.
Right.
The city doesn't, we don't do anything about that because the city's role in that is not defined, is not defined. And so if the desired action from the group is like the city should be doing something about this, then that's the part that I want to clarify. So that that's something that, we can, as a city and the council can determine, are we planning and willing to engage in that way? I feel like when we keep it, what I have found is we've tried to implement these things, if there's an assumed role of the city, but that it was not explicit in those strategies. Because if we say public agencies are going to install solar panels, I think a reaction as a city in a lot of cases is like, it's not necessarily our place or not necessarily our approach to go approach those agencies and say, hey, you should put up solar panels because it's in our CCAP. We're not doing that. So if that's what you guys would like to see, or if that's what the committee or the community wants to see, I think it would be better to be clear about that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's like, hey, we say it says all public agencies should have solar panels. What are you doing about it, city, that other agencies aren't doing that? So if
Right.
that's the expectation that we're going to be doing something about it, that's the part that I want to make transparent. Otherwise, it's hard to be actionable because I bring the strategy to other city stakeholders and say, there's disagreement about what that strategy means. If it's kind of not clear.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know it's
appreciate
tricky.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate the clarity. I think it's helpful to do that, to specify what the city can and can't do. And then I think some of the other action items can be like the RFPs. That
Mhm.
we need somebody else to do this. This is specifically what we need. And then just kind of put that into an RFP. I mean, I don't know if this one particular situation wouldn't work for an RFP, but maybe it is like, here's an action that we need a local community organization to kind of take the lead on. Just kind of identify appropriate roles for each action.
Yeah.
Making a note for a proposed new action to require or incentivize public agencies seeking land use permits in the city.
Yeah, I think a lot
Solar
of it, it's
panels.
good to think about what is the root of the action you're looking for?
Yeah.
What do you actually want to have happen? Not like, oh, if it's written this way, hopefully that would lead to this, being more specific about that. And we can continue discussing the city as a lead partner, I think, as we write our new action. I think it's not something we have to decide for sure today. But I do really appreciate this discussion. It's been helpful because I do understand both sides.
I wasn't around for the original CCAP, but I'm curious how much engagement there was with other departments within the city. And just thinking about this question about ownership of the plan and commitment to specific actions. And if we're sort of assuming or hoping that, other departments are going to be taking action or through these various, angles of city work, reality checking that is an important part of the process.
Yeah.
To make sure that we're specifying the right thing.
Yeah.
If we're getting specific.
Yeah, and how we did it last time is once the actions are it's kind of easier for people to review it once the actions are out there and then they can respond to them. So once the actions were, proposed, and we went and worked for the ones that would have a really close touch with another department, we talked through and got their feedback on those, and we'll do the same.
Great.
In some cases, well, anyway, it's kind of the next topic, so never mind. Okay, do you guys want to walk through a couple of these? I mean, the discussion we're having is really good, but I think there were a few I just wanted to make sure we were looking at together.
And Cassie, I think just to confirm, earlier you said if there's specific things, we can still follow up with you later by email.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, yeah, definitely. I knew it would be too hard to go through each of these and try to come to agreement on each of these, as it's just not a good committee activity in the committee meeting, but
Yeah.
definitely send me any of your edits individually. And if any of you want to talk through some of them specifically, I'm happy to do that. so for some of the other ones I wanted to go over with the city as a lead partner, was like the develop community solar projects that residents can subscribe to. So I changed that to support the development of community solar projects locally that residents can subscribe to for access to offsite energy, because that's an example of like, we're not the developers typically, but there are things we can do to partner with developers to bring those here. I also added the word locally because there are community solar projects that are available to people today, but when I talk to people about it, it seems like a lot of the interest is like, we should get one of those here. So I don't know if you guys feel strongly about keeping that the local part, or do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think local makes sense. It's a amorphous of enough word that,
Yeah.
you know, say there were a
Yeah.
proposed community solar project outside of
In
the
the
city,
region.
like
Yeah,
it's
I
still
would-
local in
Exactly.
Deschutes County or something, right?
Yeah.
And I don't see us like supporting community solar project on the other side of the state or something. So to me, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it, sorry, I think it makes sense. And I also think that with the outreach and education action, we can cover just like generally encouraging residents to sign up for community solar, so that the actually bringing it tends to be local.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to have those two things separate, because there are challenges for whatever we determine to be local that might not be fitting into existing community solar, which still has benefit. Those are two separate goals, getting people to sign up for and trying to support local development.
Mhm.
That we don't need to miss out on one to have the other included. So I like having that separated. Nice
Yeah.
comment, Lauren. And then I saw somebody come off mute potentially, but if you don't need to speak up, that's fine too.
And then the next one was there something?
I was just gonna mention, it wasn't showing who was speaking when they were speaking. I don't know if that's important for record keeping, but
Thank you. Yeah, if you're online, just share your name before you speak. Just for,
That was Lauren.
that was
I
Lauren.
that was Lauren. Thank you.
So the next one, just to kind of illustrate the city relationship for the mobility hub strategy, I just added support the development and expansion of a mobility hub program, and then the rest is the same. So I guess Rory, you brought this one up, like, does that seem okay, or do you feel like we lose something when we change it to that? Support a program.
Yeah, because maybe that one is perhaps unique because it is like it's a very joint effort, you know, so I wonder if that can be slightly rephrased to say like work with partners to create a mobility hub program.
Yeah.
So it's not just support, but it does identify the city's active role in that.
Yeah, I think calling out where there's a specific partnership role that's other than just,
Like a
we
broad.
support this.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I
That's a
think
good
it makes
point.
sense.
Okay, thank you.
I guess a clarifying question on that, would we be able to lead on that, or is it still that we can't lead that? Or can we encourage?
The roles and responsibilities of the mobility hub program are, I'm not the expert on this, but there are certain things that like the transit agency, like a large function of the operation, the transit agency will be doing. It's a part of the transit
Okay.
system. So, and I don't know exactly how we've defined the roles and responsibilities of the city right now.
I don't either, but then, you know, it's the other forms of mobility at those hubs are things under the city's
Exactly.
purview.
Yeah.
Whether it's ride sharing or bike sharing,
That's true.
EV charging, yeah.
I do like that proposed, like, work with partners for something that's like so specific like this is a city partnership and we have a certain lead role. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. I guess, will these other two we already discussed a little bit. I did want to highlight that one about, we have two strategies, one around solar and one around fleet electrification, where we said all public agencies will add solar and convert to alternative fuel fleets. And I was proposing switching that to just the city. And the part, I guess, that I was trying to highlight is like one of the reasons where the city has influence on others through that is by like the fact that we can be demonstrating leadership in that way. Anyway, does anyone else have other thoughts on how if we switch it to city ownership, how you guys want to see the engagement with the other public agencies reflected in that? Like, should we add part of it that says and encourage other agencies to do the same?
It's a separate action.
I do like keeping that somehow.
Yeah.
And maybe it's as simple as what you just said, like a comma, and encourage other agencies to do the same.
I think having it separate might be helpful because then.
Then you don't have the half complete action.
Yeah, I know.
Other partners could also participate in that encouragement.
Yeah.
And then it's more of an outreach and education action, which is more, I mean, that's what it would be, right?
I did have one question on this. The new language specifies new city facilities, and I was curious if there was a reason we were limiting it to new buildings.
Primarily because we have already installed solar on any existing facilities that make sense to, for the most part. I guess I shouldn't say all, if we were to look at like all of our fire stations and stuff, but we really have we've done a couple of projects with Amoresco, like an energy savings contract, and they turned over every stone looking where we could add solar to it. And I'm pretty sure we've maxed out everything we have on existing buildings. The downtown campus, we're gonna vacate within a couple of years, so we just are limited in what we can do to these buildings. So the new facilities is really where the opportunity is. We could, I'm not opposed to taking out the word new in case, like, you know,
Just in case.
yeah, we determine that there is more opportunity on an existing building that,
Or if you end up acquiring a new
yeah,
building.
totally.
Yeah. Like just leaving it open would be
Yeah.
great.
Okay, thank
I-
you.
I also wonder, and I've given this feedback since the goal was available already for the electric fleet, that having a goal to convert to electric when it's less expensive isn't an electrification or climate goal. That's a cost savings goal that should already be part of fleet management, and isn't actually doing it for climate. So we can have more ambitious goals than do things that are possible better and save us money today. That's just one side note that I've already shared before. But I guess with those things, where in this process, I feel like some of the opportunities for an ambitious target goal happen more in leadership and with elected officials. So like, for example, other communities, elected officials might say, we're going to electrify all light duty vehicles by next year, whatever the goal is. How does that show up with this process versus city goals? And is there an opportunity for, like, how do you imagine those things kind of working together over time with this process? And then, yeah, I don't know. It's like, how do you, the chicken and the egg component of those pieces?
Well, I think that in our situation, the council is looking to the committee to make the recommended goals. So I think it's within your purview to recommend
So we can
aspirational.
recommend aspirational goals.
Yeah, I
Great.
think that's within your purview.
Okay.
I see a nod from the decision maker in the room.
Yeah.
And then we are planning on going to the council when we have the new actions going to the council, which we didn't really actually do that the first time. For a couple of reasons, but we're gonna have, we'll go either in a council meeting or a council subcommittee meeting. We'll like show them, this is what the committee is recommending as new actions, and that will be their time to provide that direction to
Okay.
us. And I think we can talk about if there's like bigger stretch goals that you all are like, want to highlight for them to consider, we can plan the presentation to kind of like call out some of those things that you want them to consider more seriously. Like
Okay.
if you want to propose some things that it's too big to just like slide in a big list of actions, because it would be a pretty big aspirational goal, I think it'd be good to pull those things out
Okay.
for them to consider, and then they can give direction there and kind of carry that forward if they agree. And they will also have the opportunity to come up with their own aspirational goals.
Right.
Yeah. Does that approach sound like?
I think so.
okay, or-
Yeah. I don't, this isn't a criticism. It's just a challenge of like, a lot of our goals were intentionally kind of vague, to allow for them to not need to be redone to meet with the changes that have happened in the time that we've had. And so I see it as kind of like a little bit of somewhat of an internal conflict in my own mind of how you do both of those things at the same time through this process. But that connection and how we're interfacing with council through this process is helpful. So
Yeah.
I think
And
that'll
it's
work.
different. I mean, I've shared with you guys before, like when we put together the first CCAP, our context was very, very different.
Yeah.
This was not an established program yet. It was just, so, we don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to approach the actions the same way we did before, because
Yeah.
we're in a different position now.
That's great.
Okay. The next bucket was splitting actions with multiple parts into multiple actions. So the two that I pulled out was, we have one about multifamily recycling, and we have both like develop new code to ensure multifamily apartments have adequate space for the infrastructure. And also in that same one, we said conduct outreach and education for multifamily recycling. So I split those two up because they're quite different from each other. And then also in wasted materials for low carbon concrete, we had a commitment to using low carbon concrete in city projects, and then also creating incentives to encourage developers to use low carbon concrete. So I split up those, feeling like they were pretty substantially different. I think those were the only two. Do you guys have any questions or concerns with splitting things in that way, or any of the other ones? The good thing is that when we do our, remember we have like the strategy level and then the actions, and when we split things into multiple actions, they don't typically really affect the strategy. So we can do that without there being like too much. It doesn't really like mess up the rest of the structure of the plan at all. And then some of the ones that I changed to kind of make them more simple. The first one was that one about, we have it in a couple of places about increasing community education on renewable energy and available incentives. We have a similar one for energy efficiency. So I dropped the developing and delivering educational programs. Part of that was also, I just feel like the ideas that we've had coming out of our outreach and education have been a lot of good specific ideas that are not all specifically delivering educational programs. We've talked a lot about running campaigns. We've talked about having like graphics and branding and, some of that type of stuff. We've talked about the city updating its website. We've talked about social media. And so I just felt like there's so much in that bucket that making it broad kept it flexible and more accurate. And we haven't really been limited, we haven't been purposely limiting ourselves, but I just feel like there's a lot that fits into that bucket. And so it felt appropriate to me to have it broad like that. Is that okay? Okay. The other one that I changed was we had one about promoting renewable energy incentives. And we have one for energy efficiency incentives by providing information applying for building permits. And we had purposely that one was specific to trying to make sure we were providing that information during the permitting process, thinking like, oh, this is the touch point we have for people that are actually about to do projects. I broadened that to just providing information about the incentives for residential and commercial construction, with information targeted towards builders and developers to keep it more flexible than just specifically during the permitting process. And that's to reflect that we have some other tools that our economic development team is working on, that's like targeting information for that group, and it may not be during the permitting process, but it's a different way we're approaching it.
Plus at the point of seeking a building permit, they're already through all their like
Right.
planning and financing, development of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which I think is why we, our econ dev team they've been helping me with that, which is why they've been, creating different kinds of resources, finding them more effective. And then another one that Lauren.
Just really quickly, the thing that this is really about, like, my question is this really only about new construction, or does this also should apply to retrofitting? Because then I think we could make it a little bit more open, where it's not just builders and developers, it's also contractors. Anyway, that was just one of my questions when I was rereading this one.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll need to think about, and I might get some feedback from our economic development team about whether it would be appropriate to have a separate strategy for that. Like, would the tactics be the same, or would the tactics be different? Because I think we could include and contractors. I think that would work, but I just want to make sure we're not like missing. Like, we would take a different approach for that for any reason.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I would just, love to explore it a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that makes sense, Lauren, if it works, and I like this kind of updated channel and the comparison that I'm making in my mind, because we talked about this before with building permits of where you're actually at in the process and what the opportunity to make changes. And I think of some of the like specific city resources that are shared for things that they get a ton of questions about are very heavily used pages that exist in other places. Like, I'm thinking of the ADU and short-term rental pages that the city runs that are resources that are very heavily used by people in both of those arenas. And that information exists in other places, but it's really putting forward like, hey, this is what we're doing and why. And so I think this also, like the example that you might not get until you're like halfway through your permitting process. This is just like one narrow example. A lot of people assume that you need backup heat for installing a heat pump in a house. But there's like a form in the city system when you get all the way through all these things that you get the option of filling out that says, in lieu of backup heat, here's my heat calc that shows that it works in the cold. A lot of people don't know that. And so there's an opportunity for that to be in like those resource pages with more description.
Yeah,
So
cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking through some of the details too of adding contractors in. That might not even be inclusive enough. Like, a lot of folks, I think, who come into the city for a permit or land use approval, whatever, for some sort of retrofit or ADU or whatever, like you're saying, they're not necessarily a builder or developer. It might be themselves as a private
permit
citizen.
users, yeah.
Thinking of Neil's ADU building experience, he's got his own permits. Don't know if he'd call himself a builder or developer. Or they, hire a land use like planning consultant who's doing that permitting part of the project for them, who's not a builder or developer.
Okay, well, I'll rethink, just maybe
We can wordsmith.
I take out like,
Wordsmith.
I don't use the people descriptor.
Yeah. But
Or I use
use
something
or
that's
the-
more all,
yeah,
just all
yeah,
encompassing.
yeah.
Or you have a separate action that's focused on retrofits, right? That's a question.
Right.
The lumping and splitting question.
Yeah, which I think some of that will, the lumping and splitting and when we do the new action, like we're gonna be talking about the existing actions when we're creating our new actions so that we can make sure we're like covering everything, whether we are adapting one of the actions or just creating a new one. And then the last one was just, of probably more interest for the waste and materials group is, the strategy about outreach and education. We had it written, develop outreach and education materials for upstream consumption reduction, which I felt was awkward wording. So I changed it to encourage waste prevention and reducing consumption through outreach and education. Okay. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover as a group, but as I've said a few times, yeah, go ahead, Rory.
There's one more that's like, it's gonna eat away at me if I don't.
Oh, yeah,
mention it.
yeah. I said you had the opportunity. I thought
Sorry.
you'd have more time, but I said you'd have the opportunity.
So let me find it really quick. Okay, so T3B, bottom of page 6, is create high capacity transit corridors.
Uh-huh,
The proposed change is support the development of high capacity transit corridors.
uh-huh.
So, you know, land use transportation are two sides of the same coin. They drive each other. We have to enable the right land use pattern to create a successful high capacity transit corridor. And especially if we're talking about the corridor, that's not even the transit portion of that action itself. That's
Yeah.
everything surrounding the bus stop or whatever mode of transit is through there. So I really do think that one should stay where it is. Also thinking, you know, that the city's working on through the CPEC rules, climate friendly areas where we are like literally trying to create high capacity transit corridors in some parts of the town. So get off my land use planning soapbox now, but that's the one that jumped out at me.
So just to make sure I understand, you want to keep, instead of support the development, it's just keep the language as is
Yeah.
to demonstrate that the city has an active role in that.
Right.
Okay.
Like
And-
CET, you
and-
can't create the corridor. That
Yeah,
is
right.
the
that
city's
makes, yeah,
responsibility
that
to
makes
do.
sense.
And land use was an area, I feel like there might be,
Yeah.
there will be further refinement with other goals, so.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say like that's one that it would benefit from workshopping with the transportation group to like, how can we be more specific with that so that it is more clear. And for the transportation working group meeting, I have asked our growth management department to actually attend that. We'll talk about that when we in the next agenda item, but I think that topic in particular would be it'll be really helpful to have some of our people that work in that every day help figure that out.
And I see hands from Cubby, Lauren, and Alex. And maybe Laura. Okay, great. We'll go in that order.
In that order.
Cubby,
Okay.
Alex, well, I lost a hand. We'll start with Cubby.
All right, I'll be quick. To add to Rory's, I don't know if this was already brought up, but T3D, which is one of the recommended removing actions. It's a coordinate with the school district to encourage use of public transit for getting to school. And it says recommend removing because it's not actionable as it involves a collaboration between two non-city entities. And I understand that, but I also still wonder if the city can play that leadership role in making those connections or encouraging that to move along if that's not already happening. I don't know if I'm not part of those conversations or in transportation working groups. I don't know if that's accurate, but I just wonder if there is still a role the city can play, even if it's not either of those entities.
I think for that one, if we're interested in something like that, I would recommend that the transportation working group like start anew and try to come up with an action that reflects whatever that would be. This one is just problematic because it's just two completely non-city entities. It's too roundabout to be like city coordinate these two entities doing that. If there's something more broad about the city doing outreach and education with public agency, I think there could be something in there that we could pull, but the way that one has always been really problematic and therefore it's consistently rated whenever we do prioritization exercises, consistently rates as the very bottom action because no one really knows what to do with it. So I would recommend, I think we can keep the intent, but I think we should just kind of start anew with how to word it.
Okay, it wouldn't make sense just to reword the current one to better explain like encourage or do you think it's better to?
I would like to dig into like what we're actually
Okay.
interested in that action and figure out a better way to do it. Yeah.
Okay. And the second piece was just more of a question. As I'm looking at a lot of these actions, some of them are just really vague and general and broad. And I'm just wondering if it would be helpful to have more like, not SMART goals, but at least something more specific for some of them. And I don't, that's like a broader, larger question, but I'm just curious. I know some of them we don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but for some of them, I wonder if it would make it more likely that we do those things if we say what we're trying to do within whatever time period the plan is aimed for.
Yeah, I think I can just jump in because
Yeah.
that was along the lines of the comment I was gonna make, is it seems like we have. I don't know if it's attention or just like two types of actions, where in some cases we're trying to write it broadly to give flexibility so we don't have to come back and change it, but then we also want to have the specifics so that we can accomplish things and get them done. And so I think that's sort of a question maybe to you, Cassie, is like, are we trying to have a mix of both of those things, or we want to gravitate more to one or the other? Because it's sort of the difference between like strategy and plan, right? It's like, oh, we want to move towards these things, but what are the specific tactics? And in my mind, a plan has those specific, SMART items in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think where it has landed how it has organically, because in my view, anytime you do a strategic plan, this is like a perennial tension in all strategic plans, like how to make it flexible but actionable, specific enough to be actionable. And I feel like it's kind of, to me, it's dependent on the action where it makes sense to be more specific versus where it makes sense to be more broad. I find more problems when we make things too specific. I find that to be more problematic from an implementation standpoint, because within a couple of months, an action can be completely, the context can have changed enough that it just no longer is relevant. And then we're in an awkward position of like, well, let's do this instead of that, because that doesn't actually make sense. So to me, it's something that we can work through, and we have the strategy and the action level for each of them. To me, it's something that will be best worked through when we're in the new action workshops, and we just talk through each one. And I think where we can make it specific, it's obviously better to make it specific if we can, but just being realistic about when it's going to be so specific that it's going to be limiting.
Yeah, and I think this is where like having a narrative could be helpful, because then you can maybe somewhere in a longer CCAP, you can have narrative around each action that kind of goes into more depth about these are the specific actions that we think need to be taken given our experience today or what the situation is right now. Like I remember when we worked on the low carbon concrete and delved into that, it's like there are all these different steps the city has to do before we can even get to understanding what the low carbon rate is.
And we try to do, that's why some of them, I mean, like you noted, some of them are really specific and some are not, and like some of them do have like pretty long descriptors where we try to get more specific to varying success.
I think maybe part of my question is, are there places where now is the time to do some of the legwork to define the specificity? Like, is that part of this update process? And where are the places where it's more building an adaptive management framework to carrying forward the plan that gives us ways to adjust along the way? So maybe it's just because I feel like there's some where we probably could get more specific if we thought about it enough and we know enough, but then there's other places where.
Is it something that you feel like we could discuss? I was thinking we would have
In the
those
wording,
discussions during the new action working groups. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
the heart of those, is to have time and really talk through each action in the sector and come up with the right thing. And then
will the workshops also cover the refining or just the new?
I was planning on them being primarily new, but and this is our next agenda item, but we're gonna look, I think it'll be both, because we're gonna be looking at like, okay, after you come up with your new actions, this is like the whole package, so both will be discussed.
Alex still has their hand raised.
Yeah, hi. This I guess is kind of a minor thing, but well, I think it could be quite significant and symbolic and impactful, but just a minor suggestion to I'm just looking at my notes that I jotted down, W6A, which The proposal is to keep the same for conduct outreach campaigns that promotes food waste prevention. And I'd like to suggest, and perhaps this is more, Cassie, please say if this is more for like the action working groups that we're going to do, and perhaps a change we can discuss then. But I would love to recommend changing it slightly to include to say something like conduct outreach campaigns that promote food waste prevention and the procurement of less carbon intensive foods. I think it kind of goes in line with what Covey was talking about earlier with upstream emissions, and then also just a lot of the conversation we've been having on the waste and materials working group. So just wanted to throw that out there for thought.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it would be good. That one would be good, I think, to discuss in the working groups.
Sounds good.
And because we can discuss whether that's a new action, whether it makes sense to have that as a separate action or combine it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other burning
We're
suggestions?
gonna be talking about that process next, but there's also food.
Yeah, why don't we take a quick break for lunch and then carry on?
Sounds good.
Temperatures are always pretty intense.
Yeah.
At the end, you're like.
especially going quick. Okay. Looks like we are unmuted. Can somebody just confirm online before we leave you?
I can hear you.
You can hear.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna move on to our last, one of our last agenda topics, main meaty ones. I'm talking about the new action process.
Okay, so just a reminder, I guess, of where we're at in the overall CCAP update process. We have planned for July and August to be a period of time where we're generating the new CCAP action. So this is kind of like the big important moment when we're defining what the CCAP is going to look like. So I wanted to just talk through how I'm planning on kind of facilitating that process and just make sure you all feel ready to like embark upon that, because that'll be the next time we see each other, we'll be in those meetings. So just a big picture reminder, July and August is when we're defining our new CCAP actions. After that, we'll turn those actions over to the consultant team who's gonna do our greenhouse gas analysis on that and some additional analysis. And we also have planned to launch a community survey where we can get input on those new proposed actions from the community and just kind of gauge level of support or other things that we want to ask the community at that time. And then planning around October to get the results of both the survey and that greenhouse gas analysis. So those are kind of the next couple of steps. So this key next step, sorry, that's way too small on the slide. I just sent a memo with this information too. How I'm proposing that we do this next step, we had decided as a group that we wanted to break up into the working groups to come up with the new actions. So I'm proposing that each working group meets over the next 2 months in a 2-hour workshop. We do have to hold those as a public meeting, but I think we'll be able to hold them in the boardroom because that's a public meeting accessible. So it'll still be kind of workshopable, but I would like, if possible, everyone to attend in person because we're going to do it with sticky notes and flip charts and those types of things and really sit and discuss, you know, what the CCAPs are going to be. So right now we have those planned as 1 2-hour workshop for each of the 4 sectors. And I'm planning on coming to that workshop with a memo and a presentation where I will share, kind of remind us of the data that we have relevant to that sector from our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the existing actions in the CCAP for that sector. So we kind of remind ourselves like this is our existing workload. What do we want to add to this? And then some of the things we talked about from last meeting are I'll outline any major statewide policies that have greenhouse gas reduction implications for that sector. Potential funding opportunities relevant to that sector. I don't think it's going to be possible for that to be a comprehensive list, but I'll try to highlight if there are major funding opportunities that we know are available. And then we'll also have from the consultant team a best practices memo, which will have basically suggested actions for you to consider. So that'll be kind of a nice starting point for you all. So you don't have to just come up with all of them from scratch. And that'll be those will be actions that are, you know, other cities are using and just kind of what the best practices are. So that will be the data that you have to start the meeting. Like I said, I'm planning on getting those to you in a memo beforehand. So you have time to kind of look at it all and think about it, but we'll spend the first half hour to 45 minutes of those meetings going through all that and just discussing that and making sure that we all kind of get it. And then the bulk of the meeting will be then breaking up into like a workshop where we're coming up with the new actions. So I'm envisioning that being flip charts, sticky notes, and having you all opportunity to work individually and write your ideas and put them on the sticky notes. Then also some time to kind of like talk amongst yourselves and add some ideas to that. And then we'll do that for 10 or 15 minutes and then come back and as a group, review each of those actions and talk through them so that we all understand what they're saying. We figure out where people, you know, which of those actions are saying the same thing. And basically coming together and kind of outlining what is this new list of actions that we put out there to start with. And then after we've discussed those together, we'll do another exercise where you guys get sticky dots and you can mark which ones are the highest priority for you. And that won't be to actually prioritize or actually, that doesn't necessarily, it's not going to add or take anything away necessarily, but it's just to get a general understanding of which of these is there a lot of interest in from the committee, and or are there a handful of them that like someone put out there but no one else is really interested in that we want to just kind of discuss taking off. And then we'll review the results of that, and the hope is that at the end of that we have kind of like a list of actions, some ideas on which ones are of highest interest to the group, and then we'll have a discussion if you guys feel comfortable with that list or if you guys like want to continue discussing. And then the next step would be to bring that list to the full committee, because we do want, since we're doing this in working groups, we want the full committee to have an opportunity to actually finalize the list for all the actions. So once the workshops are done, each group is going to have to take a turn presenting that to the full group, and then the full committee will be the ones to be like, okay, this is what we want to move forward with. So that's how I'm envisioning it going. I'm very curious to see if we feel like we can do all of that in a single 2-hour workshop. I'm a little worried that we might want more time than that. So I was thinking we'll just have to see how we get after 2 hours and see if each group feels, if any of the groups feel like they want another chunk of time together or not. So that's the general gist of how we would approach it. And so what I'll do after this meeting, I'd like your thoughts on this approach, but then I need to get those scheduled, of course. And so I'll first send out an email figuring out if people have like major times that if anyone has like long vacations or anything where they know they'll be out of town over the summer, because of course it's the summer, so scheduling is going to be a little tricky. But I'm going to try to get each one scheduled, and I think I can do like 2 each month. So just based on people's availabilities, we'll just sequence those based on when people are available. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the approach, and also if you guys feel like you're like ready to go to this next step, or if there's anything else that you feel like needs to be discussed as a group or other information that you need.
I think it sounds good. Thinking about your comment, Cassie, is 2 hours going to be enough? I think maybe each work group should commit to like some homework to prep for those meetings, right? Like come in with your draft list of new actions. So it can be more about the interactive, like, you know, getting value out of having all those people in the same room rather than like a big ideation session.
Yes, I do think if there was follow-up, it could be hard to get another time.
For sure.
In this window. So yeah, homework or considering making them longer or just planning multiple meetings from the get-go with summer schedules, like you said, being a big challenge.
We could, like, would you all feel we could go as far as having everyone send me their new action ideas in advance, so that I could come rather than spending that 15-30 minutes like writing stickies, we can just go straight into reviewing them together and then discussing them.
I think that's a great idea, and it wouldn't preclude anyone coming up in that meeting.
Oh
but
yeah,
it'd
for
be a
sure.
good, nice head start.
Yeah.
This might not work, but I would putting stuff asynchronously like into a Jamboard or something, does that get tangled up in public record stuff? Or
Yeah, I don't think we can do that.
Yeah.
And
I was thinking because
the question was like
other ideas as
because we're talking about
Is this about out of meeting collaborative tools?
Well, we're gonna have public meetings and the question was, can we drop our ideas before the meeting in a collaborative tool like a Jamboard or like a Google Doc?
Who would be viewing that before the meeting? I think the question is how much is of that is inputting information, like again, to the hub. I always think of a hub and spoke model being you. Versus how much of this is members of the public body collaborating with each other outside of the meeting. If it's more of the former, inputting information to kind of a hub or something like it that you're managing that then gets discussed and deliberated on during the meeting, that's, we'll say, better or closer to better. If it's more collaboration outside of the meeting, because there is a little bit of a continuum, I think, in terms of what starts to look more like deliberation, then that gets problematic.
Yeah, and I think the problem would be like, if you're like, if Rory put his ideas in the Jamboard before you, and then you're like looking at his ideas and you're like, oh, I'm gonna like rip off that idea a little bit. I would kind of prefer to get them beforehand so that I can do a little bit of work to like organize it. So if I'm seeing the same action come up with slightly different wording, like I think we can get a step ahead if I have a little time, and then I also will have had time to look at them and think through like the questions that I want to ask as follow-ups to you, because I think that would help.
I was just ideally, if I could see, oh, somebody else already put this idea in, I don't have to repeat it, that saves you that step.
Yeah.
But if that's not acceptable, then I'm sorry.
I think for as often as that would, like, it would both add complexity and take away, Mark?
Thanks. I was also sort of thinking in terms of background research that we should do as committee members, and in terms of being prepared going into the meeting. That best practices memo that you're talking about, are there, and sorry if I might have missed this earlier, if there are any good examples of CCAPs from other peer scale communities where you think there are sort of examples of actions and what they might look like that are out of character with what we have, but could be interesting. And then also sort of data sources. In my mind, I'd love to have all the data that's available. And I know we won't have the inventory update, I assume, at that point, but any kind of data or examples, so we're not being too arbitrary in that process. But it does seem like a lot of that background information you're already pointing out will probably satisfy that. Maybe another way to frame this question, Cassie, is where you think there are gaps in what you'll be able to have prepared already that would be the most fruitful for us as committee members to do our own research.
Yeah, so the best practices memo is meant to be just that, like what are actions that are in lots of other climate action plans or several other climate action plans that we don't have that we might want to include. So that will cover that. And then the data that I'll kind of summarize in the memo it will be just pulling the relevant data from the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and also from the CCAP like dashboard that we have, where we have a couple of additional progress metrics tracked. So that's the data that we'll have. But anything in addition that you want to find yourself, would be definitely great.
Yeah, I mean, I realize you kind of are covering the things, it seems, that I would expect I'd want. And just curious if there's anything that is likely a good place for us to look into. But maybe that's going to be sector specific, and that might be something else to think about in terms of homework, that you noticed there was this kind of gap in what you were able to develop, and this would be a good place for us to do our own homework or expect to be later.
It's a good question. I think of that list that I have up there, I think that the trickiest one for me is the potential funding opportunities, just because funding is so, like, there's both so much information and also very little information. Like, so all the different funding are so specific to different projects and programs, and you can pull out, you can find Excel sheets that have hundreds and hundreds of federal grant opportunities out there. But trying to effectively use my time to compile that information, to me, that feels like the trickiest part. So if that's something, I'm not sure what I'll be able to get together for that. So I think that would be the area that you can, of those 5 things I have listed, that would be the area that I would expect to have the least information about. So if that's really important to some people, that would be an area you could dig into. Part of it too is that there's so many different types of grants out there that, like, there may be ones that I see that, like, they may be relevant, maybe not, but if you're someone who has an action that you're like, that really speaks to a grant opportunity, that would be great for people to be finding, just because that's where there's so many different types of, there might be grants for really specific programs that I'm gonna miss because I've been looking kind of broadly. So I would say the funding piece.
Thanks. No, that makes sense.
And then I think it got asked, but the best practices memo, just in the timing of how we're scheduling all these things, especially if we're trying to provide information ahead of time. However, that timeline gets laid out with the consultants.
I know, so that's a piece I'm definitely, I've been trying to get, we finished contracting, it took a little bit longer than we had hoped, and we have the kickoff meeting scheduled, but I'm hoping that they can get that to us by mid-July. I don't know, when I meet with them, they'll tell me if they're willing to commit to that timeline or not, but I'm hoping to get it all, I think based on this wanting to get the feedback back, I'd like to get that to everyone 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks before their working group, so that everyone can get me their list, like a little, maybe not a whole week before the working group, but most of a week before the working group meeting, so that I have time to work with it.
Yeah.
So I'm actually waiting. That's one of the reasons I hadn't scheduled them yet, is knowing that we need that memo before they can start. But I don't want to push I'm hoping not to push the timeline back too much.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
I had two categories or two different things that I wanted to I guess ask a question on and add. The first one was just the community engagement and stakeholder process. I know for the first CCAP with the Climate Action Steering Committee at that time, it went through a pretty extensive stakeholder engagement and community input process. And I know that the last step has some of that, but I guess what I'm thinking is I feel like our group especially has a lot of ideas and thoughts, as you have seen even in this meeting. But I do feel like there's value in reaching out to the community at large and also getting input from them on actions we may not think about or might miss. And I'm just wondering, I'll likely plan to do some of that personally on my own, but I am curious if the city can somehow do that in a short time frame, even if it means some kind of form that they can fill out, if it's not like actual meetings, but some kind of form that they can send out in a newsletter or emails or social media to get some of those ideas. And then also if there's a way to do that with specific groups that might have expertise in the topics that CCAP deals with. Yeah, so that's the first one.
So we'll have the community survey, which is our plan way of doing that. And the community survey will ask for feedback on the proposed actions, but there will also have a place for people to suggest their own new actions. We were limiting it to that because we had extensive discussion about whether we were going to do the scope of the CCAP update, and doing that type of broader public engagement definitely expands the scope quite a bit.
Yeah.
So that's the decision, is that we had decided to keep, and this also kind of related to your other questions about the sectors that we have. We talked a lot about this, that we wanted to do a light and nimble update, which means keeping the structure of the CCAP relatively the same. And also doing community engagement, but not trying to replicate something like we did the first time where we did really robust workshops. So this was the compromise that we landed on, I think, is for the community engagement part.
I think that's helpful. I think the only piece I'm curious about is doing the survey at the end. Would it be too late in the process to get new ideas at that time if you've already been through a process, or do you think it's still going to be totally fine to have that be open, or is it going to feel more just you're commenting on a plan that we're presenting at that point?
Based off of my, and I think the city's previous experience in surveys like that, they tend to be more productive for both the survey taker and the survey giver if you're responding to ideas more than just the open-ended, especially if we're somewhat capacity limited and can't, with the first CCAP, we did multiple surveys for the first CCAP, but this being like a lighter process and wanting to do just one opportunity, I think it makes more sense to do it at the end. And then it's not really too late to add anything, especially if you hear something really consistent from the community.
Okay, I think that answers it. And then the second quick point I'll just make is, I think this was mentioned by other folks as well, but the data piece of it, I would be curious in seeing if there's any data from like the past, CCAP process that could be like the raw data, if there's any of that available from a lot of it is in CCAP, but like if there's any of that raw form that's not there. And I think maybe more importantly, the emissions inventory that you mentioned, I would be also interested in seeing if we can get a little bit more granularity with some of that. I don't know if it's available on that end, but I think what's been shared with us from the inventories is pretty high level information. And I guess what I'm thinking about is like for some of the waste materials actions, it's like reducing, like waste reduction, but it's not very, it's hard to understand which actions would have what impact. Because it can be very different between, food waste prevention has a much larger impact than composting does. And I feel like, at least I feel like more data would be helpful if it's available. I don't know if there is anything.
There's some more data available. I think it would be, best if people have interest in more data, if you could identify what the additional data is that you'd like, rather than just like, because it's not available in a format that is readable, but certain things might be able to be pulled. I believe most of it is summarized. If you really look through the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, it's pretty much all in there in the usable format. So if there are specific pieces of that where you're like, what's the number behind this graph? I can't find it.
Yeah.
I could pull those things, but
Okay.
it really is the inventory. The purpose of the inventory report is to report out all of the data that the analysis did. So that's where it is in the summary form. And then the raw version is just in Excel. You can't, if you don't know how the tool was structured, you can't really like tell what's going on in there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious about some of the assumptions that the data is based on, and I feel like that could be
It's not, and
helpful.
you can't see that, like, that's not all in the, that's not in the raw data necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in the interest of time, I think I think there's some good brainstorming on the process and some what I heard. So I'm not telling people, but what I heard was some commitments to some pre-work so we can be effective with our time, which is great. Thanks for volunteering your time. And that will be our next time that we're meeting, because we're not meeting as a committee in July. So you can use this time that you have on your calendar to prep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know we're all, we don't have a lot of time, but can we attend the other groups' sessions?
Yeah, we can, because it'll be public meetings, so there wouldn't be an
Yeah.
issue, right? Yeah.
So sorry, I keep doing this second time, sorry. The other group, which other group are we talking?
So they're gonna break up into their 4 working groups, but each of them will be public meetings, so. Right now they're each kind of.
They're noticed as a public meeting of the particular working group.
Mhm.
Good. How many members?
Each one has a different number of
Yeah.
members, but less than quorum.
I would say it would be really great if we did not have a number that equated to a quorum of the full ECC at those meetings. So if you can manage that, then no problems.
Okay, so just I guess if I'll send out the schedule for everyone, and then if you're interested in showing up to another one, I think that would be great. If we'll just have to make sure we're under quorum.
Yeah.
Because then it would be, like an ECC meeting.
Is there a quorum? How many of us are there on this committee these days?
11, so quorum would be 6.
So 5.5 for. And then, just looking, this is great, the agenda review. We're looking far enough out that there's not a lot to talk about during this meeting, because we're talking about the end of summer.
Yeah, we'll have, no meeting in July and August. If some of the working groups are ready, then we would use the August meeting for them to propose their list to the ECC, so. I call that one as tentative to, because it will depend on if we're ready to do that or not, and if not, we'll figure out the alternate schedule.
Quick question, with the electrification options discussion in September. Is that, there was another sort of ad hoc working group associated with that, or is that happening over the summer, or will that be not kicking off till September?
No, so the natural gas working group is going to be engaged in a stakeholder interview, and that should happen, that will happen this summer.
Okay.
It should be in July, yeah.
I just want to make sure I hadn't missed anything.
No, thank you. That one, we just finished contracting, so, we'll get that scheduled once we have our kickoff, next week, yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Nice short meeting. Meeting adjourned.